This is the June 20th, 2018 meeting of the modules team. We have a number of different people present, and we have an exciting agenda for today. I'm unsure at the moment if we are currently sitting at quorum or not. If someone could, I could just take a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We have 14 members, and I think that puts us, we have quorum.
Yep.
Excellent. Great. So to start off, we have a couple small things on the agenda. Okay, the doc has been updated. So did we refresh okay, cool. We'll do it this way. So the first item on our list to get through really quickly is governance. There's a pull request to change the way in which new members request membership. We were doing it through pull requests, but that ends up creating a lot of duplicated effort since we're now using a tool to update our membership list. So this pull request just changes it to open an issue. Has a whole bunch of people who have responded online. Does anybody who's on the call right now object to landing? Cool, we can go ahead and land that now. The next we have is a pull request open for input meta require on core. So JD, I think you're going through this. I think we removed another pull request that we were gonna review and some other stuff. And we need to keep the links. But we can come back and get that afterwards. But so there's a pull request open on core for import meta require. This is just so people know that that's going on. There are some objections and some different thoughts towards it. I don't think we have enough time on the agenda this week to really dig into it. So we can maybe 2 weeks from now. But if we have time at the end of the meeting, we could get back to it. But if people have a time to look at that PR, that would be great. Brad had asked about making a presentation on loaders. Brad, are you on the call right now? Brad is not on the call. So if you take a look at issue 135, I think this is another future agenda item to just kind of dig into loaders, the high level of it being that a lot of our use cases are relying on us having loaders that are reliable. And so we kind of need to dig into that implementation case a little bit more. And then the last one that we have on here is another pull request, add features list to README. That is Jeffrey's pull request. Jeff, do you want to explain that really quickly?
Sure. This was just in order to close all of those issues for open features. We had talked in one of the issues about consolidating them into a list that could go into the README, and then I could close all of the other features. I see the comments on there. Obviously, it's subject to change. Obviously, not every implementation or the final implementation will, achieve all of these features. This is more of like I was hoping to just have this be like a housekeeping thing in order to let us clean up the repo. And we defer the discussion of like, wait a minute, these 8 features, shouldn't be on this list, blah, 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 because that could just devolve into an endless discussion. So I was trying to push that out. Yeah.
Cool. So since we do have quorum on here right now, there is one outstanding issue that I brought up. But assuming that I'm able to resolve my concern in the pull request, does anyone have any concerns with that pull request landing as it's currently written? Cool.
Which one are we talking about?
If I could add, Miles, if you want to, since we have quorum, if you want to just be like, hey, everyone okay with removing that one feature, you can kind of slip that in. Otherwise, we could just follow it up with another PR.
Yeah, I would really not like to see us land that particular feature in the PR because it's not something that I think is even an option at this point.
So for those of you who haven't read it, it's basically every feature that had been opened as an issue. And Miles is saying minus the thing about import module over HTTPS. So do we have any objection to, I guess, landing all the others minus that one? Cool. If that's okay with you, Miles, I'll make the change.
Yeah, make the change and then we can land it. I'll resolve. Feel free to resolve my objection.
Is this about the consolidating?
Yeah, this is just putting all the things into the pull request, into the README and closing the issue tracker.
I got you.
For individual features.
Cool. Right. Right. Cool.
Okay, cool. So as a follow-up of that, we can just say number 128 and number 134 can land. Let's just escape those. Okay. So then we can move now to the main thing that we wanted to do in this meeting, which is to discuss transparent interop. So to read the paragraph that we have in here, this meeting is to discuss transparent interop with the goal of informing and coming to a decision on if any transparent interop should be possible by default or by a loader or otherwise. Please keep in mind that transparent interop is a large umbrella. We should clarify and make distinctions about what we are discussing. One direction, two direction, etc. Does anyone want to kick this off, the chat? Well, Jordan has his hand up. So Jordan, go for it.
Hi. So as far as terminology, we seem to have most often discussed what I tend to label as require ESM and import CJS to refer to the different directions. And with the additional qualifier that when you do import CJS, there's a separate but related discussion about whether you can have named imports from CJS. And then that kind of divides into two different discussions about whether that should be possible at all with custom loaders. And then if we can agree that that should be possible with custom loaders, any of those things, then we can, then it becomes productive to say, okay, now that it's possible, can we, or should we, must we, can we make it work that way by default? So it would be most useful, I think, if as a group we came to a decision on whether any or all of those things should be made possible by custom loaders. And if we can agree on that, which I hope that we can, I expect that we can, then we can advance the discussion to talking about defaults. So does anyone have any thoughts on, or any thoughts on allowing these these behaviors via custom loaders? Specifically, any objections to it?
So we got a couple of hands up. Brad, is your comment directly to what Jordan's statement, or is it a new thread?
Nope. Different.
Jeremiah, is yours a direct comment, or is it a new thread?
Comment. When we are talking about requiring ESM, are we talking about resolving to a promise or resolving to actual imports? Or actual
that's an implementation detail that I think we would need to resolve, but I think that that's something that can be decided separately from, is this a behavior we want to be possible? And it's totally fine if we say, yes, we want it to be possible, and then we end up with an implementation that we say, now because of this implementation, we no longer, we do not want it if it means that this implementation. But I think just conceptually, we can agree that we do or do not want require ESM to work before we have ironed out the implementation details.
Wait, so how is that more of an implementation detail than resolving name specifiers from CJS?
I think that is also a name, I think that is also an implementation detail, and I think ironing that out can also wait until we have agreed. So in other words, the reason why I separated out named imports is because we have, I think we have previously identified that there may be implementation concerns there that make it tenable or not. But I think that still that's why it's separated. But I still think that we can make a decision about whether that's something we want to be possible, without having to, get into the technical details. And I fully acknowledge that if require ESM can only return a promise, that will have an impact, and that there will be opinions about that, and that will trigger discussion. But I'm hoping to kind of in a triage sense, defer that discussion until we've agreed that require ESM would be nice, essentially.
Okay.
I think those are more connected to, important to each other than you do. But yeah.
Gil, was yours a comment directly to what Jordan had said?
After Jeremiah spoke, I have two comments. First of all, we already have require ESM that returns a promise. It's called import. It doesn't really matter if it's import or require. I think the functionality is there. In terms of require that doesn't return a promise, that sounds crazy because ESM is an async loading mechanism. Once we have top level await, it would not be possible to do that. So from my point of view, that direction from CJS to ESM, either we don't need it or we can't implement it. That's my first comment. On the other, which is for me is more important, from CJS to ESM, from ESM to CJS, the whole question of loaders seems to me problematic because we need to come out with a really good statement about how this interop is happening. And if we say, yeah, you can use this loader or this loader, then we're basically splitting the ecosystem into modules that work with this loader and modules that work with the other loader, et cetera, which is fine for edge cases, but definitely not fine for interop between CJS and ESM, which we will have a lot of in the coming years. So splitting on this issue seems a bit problematic. I would prefer a good statement, a solid statement of how we do interop and how we migrate from CJS to ESM in the coming years.
Okay, Brad, your hand is up.
Yeah, so I actually like Jordan's deferring the loader discussion because we have a very vague notion of what loaders are right now. We haven't made well-defined terms, so they're kind of magical. The question he proposed, I do like. It's basically split into two parts. Like he said, the ability to use import to load CommonJS and the ability to use require to load ES modules. I don't want to talk about specifics of the APIs that we're doing. This is, to me, much more important is the ordering of effects and things. And my main statement is I think that we must allow import to load CommonJS for ordering issues. In particular, if we don't allow static import to load CommonJS, that means that we cannot interleave execution order of ES modules in the same way with CommonJS. CommonJS would always be deferred to the evaluation of modules. So after all ES modules have been evaluated in your dependencies, and I think that's problematic for a variety of reasons. Basically, anything that sets up state in a ordered fashion or is a singleton could be prone to problems of being unable to be converted to CJS or into ESM if we don't provide that behavior. So with that in mind, I think we're going to have to really think hard on importing CommonJS. And I want to make the claim that regardless of any other things about named imports, about how mechanisms work, just the ordering issue makes a clear case that we must support it in some fashion. Whatever that fashion is, I'm somewhat neutral. That's it.
Thank you. And that actually leads really, really great into I had in the comments raised my hand because as the host, I'm unable to. One thing that may be really helpful right now to discuss is an even higher level thing is like, what are the goals of transparent interop? And so Brad, you just mentioned a goal that I think is an important one that isn't often talked about, which is ordering issues. If we want to maintain the ability to specify order for a common JS module inside of ESM, static import of common JS is the only way to do it. I know Jordan, one that we've talked about in the past, and I know a number of people from the Node project also believe in this one, is transition. So to make it easier for people to transition between ecosystems. So I would like to spend a little bit of time with other people if they can raise their hands. If you have other goals aside from ordering issues and transition for why we would want transparent interop, I would love to brainstorm some of those and then follow up with anti-goals, which are what are some of the risks of introducing transparent interop, and then we can maybe talk about the trade-off of the two. So Wes, you have your hand up?
So like one of the important goals that I see with any transparent interop scheme is the ability to have some overlap, ideally as significant as possible, but definitely some overlap between the APIs that a common JS and an ESM module can expose. That way, when you have a library that's written in CJS, you can deprecate things and move things to an API that you can actually migrate to ESM and then migrate to ESM without your consumers having to go through a breaking change. Making it so that your own ESM migration doesn't force all of your consumers to break and change how they import you as well. I think that's relatively important for making it so that the ecosystem can actually adopt ESM at large.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that falls under transition, or is this more from a package author perspective?
That's definitely from a transitioning perspective.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Wes.
Daniel has something to add.
I think it really both, though. I mean, package authors are interested in providing their users for transitioning, and they're interested in transitioning themselves as well. So they're kind of interconnected in a very tight way.
Cool. Jeremiah?
Yeah, so I would like to mitigate, at least as much as possible, modules and maintainers of modules of both CJS and ESM as being treated as second-class citizens from either side. And I think if we introduce things where one thing clearly does not work and people are moving to, say, ESM or don't want to move to ESM, there will be significant contention among the community about it.
Okay, great. Gil?
Yeah, I'd like to point out that transparent interop, where you want to move from CJS to ESM transparently, will not currently, as it is now, be transparent because we only have default imports. So if we're moving from CJS default import to ESM named imports, that will anyway be a breaking change currently. Now, if we go to the named imports and tweak the whole CJS thing a bit, we lose the ordering that Brad was talking about. We lose the ordering because things don't happen in the correct ESM order.
Okay, so I'll add that to an anti-goal that currently we can't be truly transparent. Salah?
Yeah, like to be entirely honest, I'm kind of wondering if we want to clarify which is our priority going to be down the road. To have people continue authoring new common JS packages, or to allow people who are authoring ESM packages to actually have them work as common JS modules too. I think the transition needs to have clear stages where we say, okay, now the priority is that anyone who's working on either would feel that the ecosystem is supporting them. Down the road, the priority would be to actually encourage ESM over CJS, or maybe I'm wrong about that, but some clarity on those steps down the road will help us make decisions progressively towards a particular direction. And I think that direction and the steps in general leading to that direction should be something that we are clear about. Maybe the time frame would be a little bit unpredictable, but at least we must have a predictable path moving towards what I believe should be promoting ESM if there is no need for CJS in the far future. I guess that's, very, very open to interpretation, but just some clarity and milestones.
Okay, so I'm going to make a note about clarity and milestones, and we'll come back to that after we finish going through goals and anti-goals. And that seems like a good way to maybe coalesce which goals and anti-goals we should be prioritizing. Brad, you have your hand up?
Oh, I have two comments. One actually was to Gil's point about not being able to produce named imports easily from CommonJS. I personally think that is an anti-goal and not a reason we should say transparent interop is impossible for importing CommonJS. If you have a CommonJS module and you have it be a asynchronous promise as its module exports, it would appear when you import it like a ES module, or require it like as an ES module would appear. The named imports thing, if you upgrade your asynchronous module exports into ES module format, you could still keep a single default export and you would have the same visible API to your consumers. So we maintain the transparency here, even though we've transitioned from CommonJS into ESM as an upgrade path. The ability to have named exports, I would like to defer to something else, because that is a breaking change. If you were to go and upgrade from CJS to ESM, and if we are only able to support some subset of names for exports from CJS, changing that list of exports is a breaking change. You would not have to do that, though. So we can plan around it, and we can make it so you can transition from CommonJS to ESM in a way that's not visible to your consumers. So I think that's an explicit goal, and I do think it's possible, but we need documentation added about how to do that. So that's it.
Thank you, Brad. Next up is Guy.
Yeah, I just wanted to address firstly the comment you made that was because we had a two of the goals in conflict, that one of them was determined to be an anti-goal. So when you were sort of talking about Layer Miles, if named exports and execution order are going to be a trade-off between them, it's either one or the other. That therefore named exports and transparent interrupt isn't possible, or it's a non-goal. I don't think that's valid. I think it's possible to have goals that aren't necessarily consistent with each other, because we understand that this is an area of trade-offs that we have to weigh up. Like, we can't get every single goal we want necessarily. There will have to be some trade-offs made in this process. And so just because two goals aren't logically consistent with each other doesn't mean that they can't both be goals. The other thing is named exports and execution interleaving may well actually work out. I don't know if there were any updates on the spec process around that, or who might have the best update on that, but maybe someone could mention what the process is there. And then finally, on just with respect to Bradley's point, I think the upgrade path from CommonJS to ESM, we have to, in terms of the named exports there, as long as we can support the majority cases of named exports usage, and yes, a default is a valid path from default of CommonJS to default in ESM, that's a valid upgrade path. And also, just because named exports aren't necessarily always going to be valid, because, for example, ES module exports have to be valid identifier names, whereas object properties can be any valid object property name, and so you can have all those other different things in the strings. I don't, that doesn't necessarily affect the majority case where named exports are safe identifiers and safe to iterate. So yeah, just with respect to the point on specification around execution and named exports, I was wondering if anyone had an update on that.
I've been talking to people about trying to figure out something that could work there, but there's nothing to report right now. Guy, is that everything for right now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, Wes, and then myself, and then Jordan.
I mean, I think Bradley actually covered most of what I wanted to say, where even with just default, technically there is some overlap between the APIs that you can provide between them if you're willing to look up ESM via require. And that's what I believe is truly important. There being some overlap between them so you can have a non-breaking transition, even if the transition period is a little awkward in terms of your API shape. And it's just the wider you make that overlap, the more libraries can transition more easily, more breaking their consumers less, and the more people will transition. And that's why I think that's kind of important. Did you want to say something, Daniel?
Oh yeah, just saying, like, yes, like two being different doesn't necessarily mean that you can get some level of transparency between them. Just to answer an earlier point, and I also want to further the idea that, like, giving people an easier transition path helps move everybody to the long run. There was that point about the breaking change when your export list changes, but the broad sense that I get from speaking to users more and more about this is just make it easier to transition, right? Like that's going to be the high level bet for users.
And on the note on identifier names, like most of the most popular NPM packages are actually represented by TypeScript declaration files, which are actually ESM syntax. The majority of libraries only export things with valid identifier names. It's like most things, if they had them, would be able to transition easily.
Excellent. Anything else, Wes?
No, that's all.
Okay. And if I'm correct, most of the things that you were bringing up also kind of fall under transition as a goal, correct?
Yeah.
Excellent. So I thought that, we have mostly the same list for the goals, although we've gotten into some specific goal cases and transitions because it gets a little bit more specific. But I thought that I could follow up by listing some anti-goals that I think are, reasons why I myself have pushed back against transparent interop. One example of an anti-goal is confusing errors. So I don't know how many people here have tried to do named exports from a common JS module right now, but the error that you get is not actually particularly useful, which leads into a second anti-goal, which is like hard to teach. So this, I think, pairs nicely with the transition goal where we're talking about making it easier for people not having to know what they're loading. Because as long as we don't have named exports, you do actually need to know. Now, we could work against the anti-goal of confusing errors and hard to teach by making better errors. But these are two examples of kind of anti-goals that I feel our current implementation of transparent interop creates. Another one that I do want to bring up, and then I'll concede the floor, is web interop, breaking the web. I think introducing a goal that is not supported by the web by default is a potential problem. It doesn't mean this is a reason not to do it, but I do think it's a reason to be like really, really careful about what we are allowing as far as capabilities in our loader. And so with that, I will hand it off to Jordan.
Can I get some clarification on what the term anti-goal is? Because those seemed more like cons, not anti-goals. Normally I see the term anti-goal mean It's not something we are seeking to achieve.
So I was thinking about it and explicitly we're seeking not to achieve. And so that's why I said like confusing errors or hard to teach.
That's not, okay. Sure.
But we can do you want to just call them pros versus cons? Is that simpler?
No, because there's like 3 states being represented here.
What's the third state?
A goal is something we are trying to achieve. An anti-goal is something we are not explicitly trying to achieve. And there's a con, whatever you want to call it, of this is some sort of tech debt or some problem if we attempt to go forward with a feature.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think maybe I was just getting people confused because I myself was confused. And we can reevaluate this. I'll just keep taking the list and we can untangle it. So Jeffrey said helpful errors, we can make a goal. But I think the challenge there, Jeffrey, the difference is, I guess what I was trying to point out with anti-goals and maybe wasn't doing a good job with it would be places where transparent interop can take us that we don't want. And I think, maybe that is better framed as a con. But let's move to Jordan and we can try to move forward from there.
So what I wanted to sort of +1 and expand on what Guy and Wes and Bradley all said. I think that when I've been saying transparent interop, I have not been meaning strict transparent interop. In other words, to me, the value is not every detail matches everything else. There are some things that are impossible for Node to match browsers. Browsers have script tags, Node does not, for example. There are some things that are impossible to match CJS because they're inherently different module systems. I think for me, default transparent interop is in service of transition, because I think what would be better for all of us is if 5 years, 10 years, less, more from now, ESM is the default module system. And anything that is using a different module format, it doesn't matter, which means not that it's neglected or that you cannot use it. It means that it's trivial to avoid, it's trivial to not have to think about that some corners of the ecosystem will be CJS forever, for example. So a significant level of transparent interop is still valuable, because without that, I feel very strongly that people will not migrate to ESM, because what's the point? Like, why bother? And so I think that that the more we can make the transition smooth, meaning we can make the consumers who want to use ESM to have a pleasant experience, and also make the people using CJS not be punished by part of the ecosystem migrating to ESM. So both sides of that equation, I think if we do not assure that, then we are going to be obstructing the migration of the JavaScript ecosystem to ESM. So that's my motivation behind transparent interop. Is essentially ensuring a smooth transition for all involved.
Okay, thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
Jeremiah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I'm not that we have to hold it to this, but I guess maybe the idea of goals and anti-goals is a little bit easier to think of in like musts and must-nots. On that note, I'd like to sort of like add something to the entire like difficult to teach or easy to teach thing. So back before this modular groups existed, back when we were much earlier on in the process, there was some discussion about the other side of the interop, which is, of course, requiring ESM into CJS, which came up to TSC meetings and stuff. And as a presentation sort of to one of those TSC meetings, I had gathered a couple of people who do teach JavaScript or have taught JavaScript and programming languages. and kind of gone over some of the things that we were discussing with them. And one of the things that stood out the most is that it is extremely likely that having require sort of like transparently work to load ES modules, but give you a promise, even though those modules do not explicitly export a promise, would be extremely confusing to new users. And so I think we should avoid that.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Gil?
Yeah, two things. Actually, one thing, and this is something that isn't mentioned a lot, and I might get some flack for that. Transparent interop is for. I was very bullish on transparent interop until I got I found out that it's only for default, because then it's not transparent. The transition won't be really transparent. But the more important thing is the fact that transparent interop for me is the only reason for the MJS-JS split. Except for the entry point of a node, the reason that we have the MJS-JS split is because when you use import, you don't know whether you're importing a CJS or an ESM. If we remove transparent interop, we can theoretically enable JS files to be ESM modules. And
this
from
is
my
incorrect, Gil. I'm sorry to, I know I'm jumping out of the queue, but there's
No,
many reasons beyond
Wow.
interop that we need MJS. MJS is a certainty for lots of reasons. And I'm happy to go into that later.
I'm not against MJS. I'm not against MJS. I'm not sure what are the additional reasons, but from what I see about modules, except for the entry point of a program, the only reason for the MJS-JS split is transparent. There's the
right,
tooling.
But I'm saying that JS cannot be ESM for all the same reasons. So like, and I'll go into that when it's my turn, but that with or without transparent interop, MJS as the only way to have ES modules by default is necessary.
I'd love to understand the reason why, because I really tried to figure it out and couldn't, but I'll listen. But if this is true, if what I'm saying is true, then my thought about it is that making the transition from the current CJS Babel Webpack world, which is all JS files, to a fully MJS would be much more difficult than transitioning from a JS world to another JS world, from a JS CJS world to a JS ESM world. And for me, that transition is incredibly important. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Gil. Just really quickly, because it sounded like Jordan had a direct response to that. Jeremiah, Brad, Jeff, are your comments a direct response to what Gil just said?
Mine is a general clarification.
Okay, so Jeremiah, go for it. I don't see anyone else's hands up anyways, so we'll get back to it after. Jeremiah?
Can we come to a shared understanding that when we say transparent interop, we accept that we are kind of lying to ourselves because perfect transparent interop is like technically not possible? So no matter what way we cut it, it's not going to be directly as the word would intend it to be. And perhaps is maybe a little bit of a misnomer. That's all.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Jeffrey?
I just wanted to second Gil that like I also would really like us to prioritize seeing if we can not solve this problem with MJS. I know Jordan feels very strongly that it's like a done deal and there's no other way possible, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, you know, the NPM implementation doesn't use MJS and it's an implementation. It's working code. Like clearly, you know, I'm sure there are things that you can't do if we drop MJS. So maybe that's like, it's more that like there are assumptions that you're assuming that like certain things we're going to want to include in our implementation are going to require MJS. And so then it's a trade-off of like, what are those things that we can't achieve if we don't have this file extension? And that's worth having a discussion about. But I really don't think we should just like take as a baseline that like this decision has been made, it was made years ago and we must have MJS, because there's obviously a lot of pushback from a lot of quarters that a lot of people are hoping that that's not going to be required.
Do people mind if I jump the queue really quickly to talk directly to that point?
Sure.
So Jeff, one of the reasons why we need MJS independent of anything else is the fact that there's no in-source way to distinguish between CommonJS and ESM. So even if we, have no transparent interop, JS can be used for ESM. The node binary itself, when it loads a file, is not going to be able to know without a dual parse whether that file is ESM or if it's CommonJS. And MJS is a way of being explicit about it. We have interest from the IETF, and I think that there is value in having a file extension as an explicit way of stating that it's ESM, independent of whether or not it can also be supported by JS.
And can I
understand that, but as the other implementations have shown, there are plenty of other ways to let Node know that information. So maybe
no
this is the way that we end up choosing, but it's
not about Node. It's about developers. There's no other way for a developer to be explicit because the JS file extension is it's owned by multiple namespaces and there isn't an in-source way. But it looked like Wes had something to add to that too.
Wasn't this what Jordan was going to talk about?
Yes.
He didn't have his hand up, so I was assuming that he didn't want to.
I put it up, but I'll wait my turn.
Okay. Guy, Bradley, Gil, are you talking about this particular issue?
I have a point of order.
Yes.
Okay, Bradley, point of
order.
order
that this discussion is not relevant to our discussion about transparent interop itself. We are talking about the ability to import CommonJS and the ability to require ESM. I want this discussion to stay on point and not talk about file extensions right now.
I'm on the same topic here. So yeah, I do think that transparent interop is very closely linked to the source type problem. And MJS is a great simple solution that we have right now. And it also solves a lot of other problems. So it's something that solves the problem transparent interop has in terms of working out how to load a given module, as well as solving it for other scenarios such as IDEs, dual mode packages, and as Miles says, it's something that the user can use. But in terms of transparent interop and how it determines a source text interpretation, this is a huge topic of its own, and there are really a lot of ways of going about doing that. And there have been a lot of proposals. I mean, there are like websites devoted to the source text problem in Node. So this gets into a huge area, and I do think the transparent interop does touch on this area. But I do agree with Bradley as well that this isn't a conversation that we can go into here and now because it's such a huge topic. But I just think people have to be careful in assuming assumptions around how that topic works out, because there's lots of ways of doing these things and working out if something's a CJS module. And we shouldn't assume what is and isn't possible on that.
Okay, thank you, Guy. Jordan?
Yeah, so I agree with Brad. I do not want to dive into details. The thing that compelled me to jump the queue there was I would prefer if we did not try to make decisions about transparent interop with the, in my opinion, incorrect belief that it will have any implications for the necessity or viability of MJS in general. So if we can defer that, then great. We can come right back to the original question is, do we want some percentage of transparent interop to be possible? And then separately, what do we want to do by default?
Thank you, Jordan. The queue is empty right now. Oh, Jeffrey. Your hand is up, Jeff.
Hey, so happy to leave that topic to the side for another day. To answer Jordan's question, I kind of like the idea that Miles is pursuing with, I shouldn't say kind of, I do like the idea that Miles is pursuing about like a very loader based and loader centric approach to things. I think though that like what I would, here's I'm just gonna throw out what I would do if I were the ruler of everything. I would love to just have like Node be, you know, it ships ESM is its default mode of operation. And if you want to do anything with CommonJS, at least say if the entry point was CommonJS, however that is defined, you have to like npm install CommonJS loader or whatever, and that, or maybe multiple loaders. And then that just like throws into your app whatever loaders you need to enable however much or little CommonJS or transparent interop support you need. And that's how we can kind of control how crazy we get with like, do we allow static imports from CommonJS? Do we allow things that break spec, etc.? They could be like farther and farther out there loaders, but they at least exist. And the really core ones for like basic CommonJS interop should really be developed by the Node core team and released at the same time that the base like ESM implementation gets released, even if they're not necessarily part of core or published in npm or something like that. So it's a way of like splitting the difference between like quote unquote supporting it by default and, you know, not having it in core.
Bradley.
So I really want to push the loader stuff out as far as we can because we haven't discussed even what loaders are in this group. So they're kind of magical because we don't have any description about what they can do or what they are, that kind of stuff. That said, I want to raise a concern I have with your idea that we ship only ESM in Node, and that is our support structure for older releases. If we were to migrate so that Node only supports ESM in its default loader, that means that no existing files running CommonJS would be able to be run. And in particular, that means it's a very large breaking change where we go from one version of Node that is defaulted to CommonJS to another version that is defaulted to ES modules, meaning that in one version, you didn't have to have a flag. In the next version, you do have to have a flag. And we have to keep this kind of dichotomy of there are two different default ways Node operates for the entire LTS between this breaking change. And I would really prefer we avoid that.
Can I just respond to that, Miles?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so Bradley, if I think I mentioned this, but maybe it's too briefly. I was saying it only if the entry point that Node loaded was ESM would like the CommonJS loader stuff be required. Like I don't know how we're going to define how Node knows what the if your entry point was CommonJS or ESM. There's like plenty of different options floating out there in the implementations for how. But like, if you do node space index.js and that's a CommonJS file, that would just behave the same way it does now. And Node would have to keep all of its current, CommonJS support. It's only if you do, if you start the thing node index.mjs or many of the other ways to start loading in ESM mode from the get-go, then we could have CommonJS be something that needs to get layered on top of. And then that gives us a nice way to like gradually, as the world becomes ESM, the need for loaders starts to.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And Jan?
Yeah, so just as a quick note, even though we get into a lot of technical detail with this, having a loader flag works okay if you have your average npm start server. It does not work very well for something that is, for example, a CLI tool that you want to distribute where you have an entry point with a shebang. Because if you want to have a portable shebang, you don't pass command line arguments And that means that we suddenly are up to, we need multiple binary node entry points for the different modes because loader flags won't cut it anymore. Unless loader flags are in some kind of metadata, like it becomes complicated once we start saying that for a non-trivial amount of especially CLI tools that are distributed via NPM, we will want to have them use flags.
Okay, thank you, Jan. So I had my hand up, and there's like kind of two things. First, to Jan, would dynamically being able to call loaders help with that?
Most likely, yes. Like if you could just do it at runtime in your entry point, then yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I guess that would kind of break. Anyways, I won't dig too far into that. What I do want to maybe say though, and Brad, to your point about not talking about loaders, I want to maybe phrase it the opposite way. Is it maybe too soon for us to dig too far into transparent interop until we've actually defined loaders better? Should we maybe be shifting focus and putting effort into our loader implementation and then making decisions about transparent interop once we know the capabilities of the loaders? Brad?
I would highly discourage that approach because the ability of loaders is very limited. And I think that's part of why I want to discuss this, have a presentation on them separately. I think we are putting too much reliance on loaders right now. I don't want to keep adding more reliance on them. They are not magical, they are limited, and we should approach them with care. Whatever we ship with loaders is another thing that we cannot unship later. We can spend time evolving what we understand to be loaders, but stating we can't discuss any features until we figure out loaders is a bit of a problematic thing for me to go along with. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about, I want to ship multiple loaders in Node, you're talking about we have multiple modes of evaluation. Just like Jan was saying, this is problematic for CLIs. This is also problematic just from a usability standpoint. What happens if you switch into, let's say we have two conflicting loaders for whatever reason that we decide to ship by default. If I have like -- loader, CJS main, and then -- loader, ESM main, those are in conflict with each other. If we go even further, why are we having multiple loaders to begin with? Shouldn't the default be something that is able to be used, maybe not to a full transparent sense, but has this overlap that Wes was talking about? We're trying to seek this transition period, and we want to serve that. Serving it by creating multiple modes of evaluation is something that I'm very afraid of, and it's also something that's being led into by our reliance of putting all use cases within do it in a loader. I don't want us to rely on loaders for everything. Our default implementation should be suitable for the average user, whatever that means.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. I think that's a very reasonable point. So, Kevin, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, so as far as the goals of interop go, I thought of a one-sentence description that kind of wrapped up my thoughts. But yeah, a choice of module system by any package does not enforce a choice of module system upon any other package. So I kind of think about that as kind of like a sort of variation on a Python 2 rule. And that's to, allow the ecosystem to be healthy and not split. And then a kind of corollary of that is that we need to not require that package authors publish 2 versions of everything that they want to publish. That just follows from the other rule. So anyway, I think that's the most important thing.
Okay. We are right at 2 o'clock, and I personally have to drop. I know people have their hands up. Jeffrey, I'm sorry that I'm going to actually just cut at 2 because I know other people need to drop, and we could probably talk about this for a whole other meeting. I'd like to suggest that perhaps our next meeting, we spend the first part of the meeting talking about loaders and the second part of the meeting talking about interop in general, not just transparent, but how we want to handle interop. And that can introduce things such as make require function and import meta require. How do people feel about that?
That sounds good. Can I also suggest that we add to the topics, like just to talk about the development that people are doing?
Yeah.
Various implementations people are working on. Yeah.
So we'll open an issue with the agenda. Anything can be added. You just need to request it. And then outside of that, if you have issues or pull requests, you could just add the modules agenda label to it and we'll get surfaced into the meeting. And with that, I'm going to end the YouTube. Oh, I'm not Michael, you're the host, so you're going to have to do that. And I'm going to drop right now. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a good one.